I did not expect the phone call to change the trajectory of my entire life. At that point, I was drifting. The kind of drifting you don't notice until the current starts pulling you somewhere you don't recognize. I'd been laid off from my job in Detroit 3 months earlier. My savings were drying up faster than I wanted to admit. My girlfriend and I were taking an unannounced break that was beginning to feel dangerously permanent. I was 34, exhausted, and clinging to the belief that something out there still made sense. Then the attorney called. "Mr. Ward," he said, "I'm contacting you regarding the estate of your mother, Elaine Ward. Before her passing, she designated you as the sole beneficiary of her property, located in Brookwell, Michigan. My mother had never said a single word about owning property. In fact, she was the kind of woman who told you everything you didn't need to know: what vitamins to take, which gas stations overcharged, which neighbors' dogs were unstable. But she never mentioned that she had a house 2 hours north of where we lived, a house she grew up in, a house she left behind without ever explaining why. I remember gripping the phone until my fingers went numb. I didn't know she had another home." The attorney paused, like he expected me to say that. "Most people don't," he said carefully, "but she did, and now it's yours." It took 2 weeks, a stack of paperwork, and more questions than answers before I finally drove to Brookwell to see the place for myself. I expected a small cottage, maybe a rundown duplex, something ordinary, something easy to understand, something that felt like my mother. What I found instead was a house that felt like it had been waiting for me. The wind carried the February cold like a blade. I stood in the long gravel driveway staring up at the structure rising before me. A 2-story Victorian painted a pale washed-out blue that had peeled in long strips, revealing the gray wood beneath. The porch sagged to one side like a tired exhale. Dead vines clung to the railings. A tattered wind chime hung near the door, twisting even though there was no breeze. For a moment, the strangest feeling washed over me. I had never seen this house. I had no memory of stepping foot in Brookwell as a child, but something inside me recoiled with a familiarity I didn't understand. It felt like walking into a room you'd dreamed of once but couldn't place. I told myself it was nerves. That grief and stress were playing tricks on me, but deep down something whispered that I was finally touching the one truth my mother had worked her entire life to bury. I walked toward the porch, each step crunching the frost-bitten gravel beneath my shoes. I took out the key the attorney had mailed me, wrapped in an envelope with no note, no context, nothing but cold metal and silence. But before I could fit it into the lock, I noticed something taped to the inside of the front door, visible through the clouded glass panel. A sheet of yellowed paper, lines written in my mother's handwriting. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house breathed out a wave of cold so sharp it made my eyes water. The air smelled like dust trapped for decades, the kind of dust that belonged to stories no one told anymore. The hardwood floors creaked under my weight, protesting my presence. I closed the door behind me and finally read the paper taped there. Rules for the Ward house. Follow them. 1. Never go into the basement after sunset. 2. Never open the iron door under any circumstance. 3. Never sleep on the first floor. 4. Do not remain in the house when the wind rises. 5. If you hear knocking, no matter how soft, do not answer. There was nothing else, no explanation, no reassurance, no signature, just 5 rules, 5 sentences that felt less like a warning and more like the remnants of something my mother had survived. For a long moment, the only sound was my heartbeat thundering in my ears. I whispered it out loud just to make it feel less surreal. Rules? What the hell, Mom? My mother was sensible, rational. She worked in finance. She double-checked seatbelts, expiration dates, and weather forecasts. She didn't believe in ghost stories or luck or curses. She barely even believed in intuition. So why would she leave this? The wind chime outside let out a single metallic ring, even though the air in the house was dead still. That was the moment I felt it, the shift. Like the entire house adjusted, recognizing me. A faint pressure settled around my shoulders, not crushing, just present, watching, waiting. I shuddered involuntarily. Before I continue, let me say this. If you're into real eerie stories that come from real places, real people, and real histories, stories like this one, make sure you hit that subscribe button to support the channel. It helps keep these true tales alive and gives me the courage to share the next one. Now, back to the Ward house. I walked deeper into the entryway, forcing myself to breathe normally. I told myself rules were nothing more than old habits. Maybe my mother had been paranoid toward the end. Maybe she wrote them long ago when her parents lived here. Maybe the house had a structural issue in the basement, or maybe there was wildlife nesting beneath the floorboards. Logical explanations existed. They had to. Still, a strange ache pressed against my ribs, half dread, half curiosity. The living room was dim, even though sunlight pushed against the curtains. The wallpaper was an outdated floral pattern, yellowed with age. Furniture sat under white sheets like ghosts frozen mid-gesture. A cold draft moved through the room, brushing the hair at the back of my neck. I ignored the shiver. In the dining room, I found an old wooden hutch filled with dusty plates. At the bottom, tucked under a folded napkin, there was a small carved toy boat. Someone, likely a child, had etched initials into the side, M.A. I didn't know anyone with those initials. My mother never spoke of a sibling, never spoke of any childhood friend, never spoke of anything that came before her 20s. The discovery made my chest tighten with an emotion I couldn't name. I moved on, exploring each room with deliberate steps. The kitchen was old enough to belong in a museum. The upstairs held 2 bedrooms, both eerily untouched. One had children's drawings hidden beneath peeling paint, stick figures holding hands under a sun with too many rays. The other had a door with a lock on the outside, a detail that unsettled me more than I admitted. But it wasn't until the second night that something truly broke the boundary between curiosity and fear. That evening I ate a cold sandwich standing at the kitchen counter and tried to ignore how the shadows around the room felt too still. After cleaning up, I headed upstairs with a lantern I'd brought because the house's electricity still flickered inconsistently. According to Rule 3, never sleep on the first floor. I didn't believe in rules like these, but it felt disrespectful, dangerous even, to break them. Whether the danger was psychological or structural didn't matter. My mother believed in them enough to write them down. That alone meant something. I placed the lantern on the floor beside the old guest bed upstairs, crawled under a heavy quilt that smelled like cedar and mothballs, and tried to sleep. The house groaned occasionally, settling with age. Pipes cracked. Wood expanded. All normal, all expected. At around 1:20 a.m., the house fell completely silent. Silence isn't always absence. Sometimes it's awareness. I woke up with a jolt, every muscle in my body tightening at once. The kind of instinctual alertness that doesn't come from dreams, but from something primal. I sat up slowly, listening, nothing. Then, after several long seconds, tap, 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 not loud, not persistent, just soft, distant tapping. It came from downstairs, from deep below the floorboards. I held my breath. Tap, 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 steady, rhythmic, intentionally spaced apart. My first thought should have been plumbing, or the furnace, or the old pipes contracting from the cold. That's what I should have thought. That's what I wanted to think. But the taps were too evenly spaced, too deliberate, as if someone was waiting between each one. I swung my legs off the bed. The lantern flickered in response, its flame stretching toward the hallway like it was being pulled by something unseen. I tried to steady my breathing. Old houses make noise. This house just happened to be older and louder than most. But then I remembered Rule 5. If you hear knocking, do not answer it. My skin prickled. I grabbed the lantern and stepped into the hallway. The boards creaked beneath my weight, the sound echoing far louder than it should have. The air was colder out there, 10 degrees colder at least. My breath fogged in front of me even though it was only February, not January deep freeze cold. The taps came again. Tap, tap, tap. I followed the sound to the top of the staircase. The lantern hissed and nearly went out. A cold wave rolled up from the first floor, climbing the steps like a slow-moving tide. Every instinct told me not to go down. I leaned forward and listened, trying to pinpoint the source. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the basement. Rule 1. Never go into the basement after sunset. I clenched my jaw. I wasn't superstitious. I wasn't the kind of person who believed in messages from the dead or haunted warnings etched in decades-old paper. I was a man who needed this house to sell so I could start over. But something deep inside me whispered that if I took one more step toward the basement door, I would cross an invisible line I could never come back from. I didn't move. Then the taps changed. Tap, 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 tap. 4 knocks. The last one sharp, hard, urgent. The house's air pressure dropped so suddenly, my ears popped. A heavy thud echoed from below, like something throwing its weight against metal. I froze, because I had seen only one metal surface in this entire house. The iron door my mother told me never to open. The thud came again. Something was hitting it, hard. I stumbled back from the staircase, heart hammering, the lantern shaking in my grip. The flame inside twisted violently, nearly extinguishing. Then all at once, the thudding stopped. The house became silent again, unnervingly silent, as if it was holding its breath alongside me. I ran back into the bedroom and shut the door, sliding the quilt against the bottom crack to block the draft. I sat on the bed, the lantern flickering wildly beside me, and waited for what felt like hours. No more taps, no more thuds. But the rule echoed endlessly in my mind, beating in time with my pulse. Never answer the knocking. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. In the morning, sunlight streamed through the thin curtains as if nothing had happened. The house felt warm again, almost inviting. Breakfast tasted normal. Coffee smelled comforting. And for a few minutes, I convinced myself that the tapping had been nothing more than the normal settling of old materials in winter cold, until I walked downstairs and found footprints on the wooden floor, thin, faint imprints, bare, small, child-sized, and they led directly to the basement door. My mother's rules were no longer superstition. They were the only thing keeping me alive. And still, something inside me whispered that I had only just begun to uncover the truth buried in these walls. For the rest of that morning, the footprints remained exactly where I found them. Faint, dusty outlines pressed into the old wooden floor. They were so small I could cover one with the palm of my hand. They trailed from the bottom of the staircase across the hallway and stopped directly in front of the basement door. But what unsettled me most was that the footprints faced the wrong direction. They pointed toward the door, not away from it, as if whatever left them hadn't come out of the basement. It had been standing in front of it, waiting. I crouched down to get a better look. The boards were cold under my knees. When I reached out and touched one of the prints, the dust smudged instantly beneath my fingertip, proving it wasn't paint, mold, or anything permanent. Something had made those marks recently, after I'd fallen asleep upstairs. The house creaked softly overhead, a slow, crawling sound like the shifting weight of a structure that didn't like being watched. I straightened and backed away, my pulse drumming harder with each step. The rules on the door were beginning to feel less like superstition and more like instructions for surviving an environment I barely understood. My mother had lived her entire adult life pretending none of this existed. I'd only been here 2 days and already felt the quiet pull of something old and unseen. But I couldn't just sit in that fear. That wasn't who I was, not who I needed to be. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, breathing in the cold air until my chest stopped tightening. Sunlight glinted off frost-covered grass. Brookwell was quiet, the kind of small town that felt held together by routine and unspoken agreements. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. A woman scraped ice from her windshield. A pickup truck rumbled down the street like it did every morning. Normalcy existed everywhere except on my property line. My plan was simple: get out of the house for a few hours, talk to the locals, gather information, understand why my mother had left this place behind and why she hid it from me. I needed context, evidence, something that explained the rules, something that explained the tapping I heard last night, or the footprints on the floor. I started with the hardware store on Main Street. I needed tools anyway: new window latches, fresh caulk, patching supplies, and maybe someone who'd been around town long enough to know something. The bell over the shop door chimed when I stepped inside. Warm air washed over me, thick with the smell of cedar and motor oil. A woman in her mid-50s stood behind the counter reading a newspaper. Her name tag read Barb. She glanced up, offering a polite smile that faded when she recognized me. "You're Elaine Ward's boy," she said. Not a question. I cleared my throat. "Yes, I'm Ethan." Barb folded her newspaper carefully, as if buying herself time. "You moved into the old Ward house." Another statement, not a question. "That's right," I said. "I'm doing some renovations. Figured I'd stop in for supplies." She nodded slowly, but her eyes didn't leave mine. A searching expression passed over her face, one I didn't understand until she spoke again. "Has it been quiet over there?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" Barb's lips pressed into a thin line. "Just making conversation." But she wasn't. I could feel the weight behind the words, the hesitation, the fear she was trying to bury beneath politeness. "I heard tapping noises last night," I said before I could stop myself. "From the basement." The color drained from Barb's face. I regretted saying it immediately. "I see," she whispered. She stepped back slightly, like she needed distance. "Well, old houses make old noises." That's what I thought. I tried to laugh, but it came out thin. "But this felt different." Barb didn't answer. She turned, grabbed a stack of paint samples, and pretended to sort through them. Conversation over. A man stepped out from an aisle behind me, holding a bag of bolts. He was tall, early 60s, with shoulders that looked like they'd spent a lifetime lifting things heavier than opinions. "That place has a way of doing that," he said. Barb shot him a warning look, but he kept talking. "You'll hear knocks, footsteps, whispers. House has history." I spun toward him. "What kind of history?" He shrugged. "Depends who you ask, but the Aldridge family lived there once, back in the 60s. A chill slid down my spine. "Aldridge," I repeated. He nodded. "Father, mother, and their boy. People around town said the kid was troubled." He lowered his voice. "They kept him downstairs most days." I stared at him, heart thudding harder with every word. Barb slammed her newspaper down on the counter. "Edward, don't start." He ignored her. Strange noises, doors slamming, lights going out. Cops were over there more than once for disturbances. "What happened to them?" I asked. "That's the thing," he said. "One day they were gone. Whole family. Poof, vanished. And the house sat empty a while before your grandparents moved in." He didn't sound like someone spreading rumors. He sounded like someone laying down facts that nobody wanted to say out loud. "People said the boy died down there," he added, "but nobody ever proved it." Barb's voice cut through the air like a knife. "That's enough." Edward held up his hands in surrender, just telling him what he ought to know. My mouth felt dry. "Did anyone ever hear tapping, footsteps, anything like that?" The man studied me for a long moment, his weathered face solemn. "Everyone who ever lived there heard something." Those words followed me out of the store. They clung to me like the cold. I loaded the supplies into my car and sat behind the wheel, staring at the house's direction even though I couldn't see it from here. Something inside me twisted, a mix of dread and determination. This house wasn't just old, it wasn't just neglected. It held something inside its walls, something with weight, memory, sorrow. I tried calling my girlfriend Mara. She didn't answer. I sent a text. "Miss you. At the house now. It's weird. Call me when you can." But the message stayed unread. I drove back to the house anyway. The Ward house looked the same as when I left it. Tired, slumped, resigned. But something about it felt slightly different. Almost as if it was aware I'd learned more about its past. As I approached the porch, a gust of wind cut across the yard. The old wind chime clattered violently, even though the air had been perfectly still seconds earlier. A strange metallic whine echoed off the side of the house. My heart rate spiked. Rule 4: do not remain in the house when the wind rises. I hurried inside, shutting the door behind me. The air returned to stillness almost instantly, like the gust had been meant only for me. I took a slow breath and walked through the rooms with my tools, forcing myself to focus on practical tasks, tightening loose cabinet hinges, patching holes in the walls, replacing the cracked window latch in the upstairs hallway. But even as I worked, I couldn't shake the sense that something moved behind me in the corners of my vision. Shadows stretching where they shouldn't stretch, soft shifts in the air that made my skin prickle. Around noon, I found something wedged beneath a floorboard in the guest bedroom. The board itself was loose, almost intentionally loose. I pried it open and discovered a small leather-bound journal, its spine cracked with age. A child's handwriting filled the first page. Property of M.A. The initials matched those carved into the toy boat I found in the dining room. My pulse quickened as I turned the pages. Most entries were short, simple observations about the weather or the house. But as I kept flipping, they darkened. Scratchy sentences ran along the lines like frantic whispers. I hear them upstairs. I hear them talking about me. I don't want to go back in the room. please don't make me go back. It hurts to breathe down there." My stomach clenched. This wasn't a haunted house prank. These were the real words of a real boy living through something unbearable. The last entry was dated September 1977. They said, "I must stay here tonight. In the dark room, they said I must learn. I don't want to learn. I just want the voices to stop." My hands tightened around the journal until the leather cracked. The air felt heavy, pressing down on me. Whatever happened to this boy, Micah Aldridge, it was something terrible enough that nobody in town wanted to talk about it. Something terrible enough that my mother had escaped it and spent the rest of her life pretending it didn't exist. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Just an empty hallway. But I could feel it. A shift. A presence brushing past me like static electricity. I closed the journal and stepped back. The house suddenly felt smaller, walls inching closer, air growing colder. A faint tapping sound drifted through the floorboards again, barely audible but impossible to ignore. Tap, tap, tap. I forced myself to stand still, to breathe slowly, to analyze instead of react. The tapping wasn't random. I'd heard enough Morse code back in high school to know the pattern wasn't entirely unfamiliar. 3 taps, a pause. 3 taps again. It meant something. I had no idea what. The tapping stopped abruptly. Silence filled the space like a thick fog. Then my phone rang, cutting through the tension so sharply that I flinched. Mara's name lit up the screen. I answered quickly. "Hey, thank God. I needed to hear your voice." "What's wrong?" she asked, her tone soft but cautious. I hesitated. "How do you tell someone you found a dead boy's journal under a floorboard and heard tapping that might be Morse code coming from a basement door you're not supposed to open?" "Just weird house stuff," I said finally. "Old pipes, old floors, you know." She didn't laugh. "Do you want me to come up this weekend?" Relief washed over me. "Yeah, I do. I really do." "Then I'll be there Friday night." Her voice softened. "Maybe the house won't feel so heavy when there are 2 people in it." Her choice of words unsettled me more than she realized. We hung up, and I went back to working, trying to ignore how the house seemed to shift around me throughout the afternoon. The walls groaned in slow, unsettling rhythms. Drafts slipped across my shoulders like cold fingertips. Every now and then, I heard faint footsteps in the hallway, soft, hesitant, childlike. By evening, I couldn't focus anymore. The weight of the house pushed too heavily on my senses, demanding attention. After dinner, I decided to walk around the perimeter outside, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The sky had turned a soft gray, clouds rolling in thick and slow. The wind chime rattled again. The porch boards groaned under my boots. I stepped into the backyard and froze. Carved into the dirt near the basement window were fresh lines, distinct, deliberate. 3 long scratches, 3 short scratches, 3 long scratches, SOS. I turned slowly, scanning the yard, the house, the tree line. The air was still. Nothing moved, but I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Something inside this property wasn't trying to hurt me. It was trying to communicate. My chest tightened. Every instinct inside me screamed to run. But something else, something deeper, told me to stay, to listen, to finally uncover what my mother had spent her life trying to forget. When Mara arrived that Friday, things only grew stranger. She stepped out of her car with 2 travel mugs of coffee and a bright smile, but her expression shifted the moment she looked at the house. "It's colder here," she said, rubbing her arms, "like 10 degrees colder." "It does that," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Old insulation." But as soon as we walked inside, The floorboards groaned under her steps, in a way they didn't for me. The curtains fluttered, though no air was moving. A soft patter echoed in the ceiling above us, like someone walking in circles. Mara stiffened. "Is someone upstairs?" "No one," I said quietly. "Just us." We walked through the rooms together. I showed her the journal, the footprints, the loose floorboards. She listened without interrupting, her brow tightening with each new detail. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "You shouldn't be living here alone." "I won't be," I said. "Not now that you're here." But her eyes drifted to the basement door. "What's behind that?" she asked. "I haven't opened it," I said. "It has 3 locks." "Let me guess," she said. "Your mom wrote a rule about it. Never open the iron door." Mara stepped closer to the door, studying the metal surface. Her breath fogged in front of her, even though the hallway was warm. She stepped back quickly. "It's freezing," she whispered. "Ethan, that isn't normal." Before I could respond, the house groaned, loud enough that dust drifted from the ceiling. The lights flickered. Every hair on my arm stood up. Then the tapping started again. Tap, tap, tap. Mara grabbed my hand, her fingers trembling. The taps grew louder, more urgent. Tap, 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 coming from behind the iron door. The house fell into a heavy hush, as if holding its breath. A faint whisper drifted through the hallway, not clear enough to understand, but real enough to raise goosebumps across my skin. Mara's eyes widened. "Did you hear that?" I nodded slowly. The whisper came again, louder this time, a sound like breath pushing through water, words forming from somewhere deep in the house. "Let me out." Mara stepped back so fast she nearly fell. "I'm not staying here tonight," she said, panic rising in her voice. "Ethan, I'm serious." I reached for her arm. "We can go to a motel. Just stay with me." She shook her head. "Not here. I'm sorry. I can't. Something feels wrong. It doesn't want me here." The last sentence hung between us like a verdict. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Whatever's in this house," she whispered. "It only talks when I'm here." She didn't wait for my response. She grabbed her bag, brushed past me, and walked out the front door. I followed her outside as she climbed into her car. "Mara, please." "I love you," she said through the rolled-down window, "but I'm not going back inside that place. You shouldn't either." Then she drove away. The house watched me walk back inside. I felt it. The quiet around me thickened, like the air after a storm. As I shut the door, the last rule pulsed through my mind. If you hear knocking, do not answer it. And that night, when the tapping began again, soft at first, then louder, then frantic, I finally understood why. Because something behind that door wasn't trapped by accident. Someone had locked it there, and whatever it was tired of being alone. After Mara drove away, the silence that followed wasn't the natural quiet of an empty home. It felt heavier, purposeful, as though the house had exhaled after gripping its breath too long and now waited for me to make the next move. I stood in the kitchen, one hand braced on the counter, trying to steady my breathing. The refrigerator hummed. The walls creaked. But beneath those ordinary sounds was something else. A tension threaded through the structure of the house, like nerves under skin. An awareness. I kept glancing toward the basement door, half expecting it to tremble or shudder under pressure. But it remained still, too still. The kind of stillness that hides rather than rests. I knew the rules, and I knew I was dangerously close to breaking them. Never go into the basement after sunset. Never open the iron door under any circumstance. I had already broken the first one, twice. The second was next. I could feel it tightening around the edges of my thoughts like a vice. Curiosity and dread were merging into the same thing. I spent the rest of that night pacing from room to room, turning on every light in the house. It changed nothing. Shadows gathered where they shouldn't gather. The corners of each room felt a fraction darker than they had been when I first arrived 2 days earlier. The tapping continued intermittently, 3 precise taps, and every time it came, the lights dimmed as if the power lines were straining under some invisible pressure. I didn't sleep. I didn't even lie down. I sat in the upstairs hallway with my back against the wall, watching the stairwell, waiting, listening, and just after 4 a.m., the tapping stopped. Not faded, not slowed. Stopped. Absolute silence flooded the house, so abrupt and absolute that I felt my ears ring in the void it left behind. That was the moment I made up my mind. Something was behind that iron door. Something that had been trapped far too long. Something that had been reaching out in the only ways it could. I didn't know if it was human. I didn't know if it was dangerous. I didn't know if it wanted help or something far worse. But I had to know. The next morning, I called every locksmith within 50 miles. Most didn't answer. A few politely declined when I mentioned it was an industrial door, and one told me he didn't work on basement bunker locks, which left me wondering how common these things could possibly be. But at 11:42 a.m., I found someone. "Connor Hale speaking," a voice said. "You need industrial access." I could hear the clank of metal tools behind him. He sounded confident, busy, unflappable. "Yeah, I have a door, a heavy metal one with 3 exterior locks." There was a pause. "Old or new?" "Old, probably 60s. I heard something shift in his tone. "Interest, maybe." "Send me a picture." I snapped a photo of the iron door and sent it. Not 30 seconds later, he responded, "I can be there in 2 hours." 2 hours felt both mercifully short and unbearably long. I spent the time cleaning the house, not because it needed cleaning, but because I needed something to anchor me. Every scrub of a countertop or sweep of dust became a way to keep the rising panic at bay. At exactly 2:05 p.m., a white utility van pulled into the driveway. A stocky man in his late 40s stepped out carrying a steel toolbox that looked like it had survived a war. He introduced himself, shook my hand firmly, and immediately asked to see the door. Connor didn't waste time with conversation or small talk. He walked down the basement steps with the confidence of someone who never hesitated in a dark place. But when he reached the iron door, he slowed. "Well," he muttered, kneeling in front of it. "That's not standard." "No kidding," I said. He ran his fingers over the rusted locks and the thick seams where the metal met the wall. Then he pressed his ear against the cold surface for 2 full seconds. "What are you listening for?" I asked. He didn't answer at first. When he did, his voice was quieter. "Movement." My throat tightened. "Do you hear any?" He leaned back. "No. But the metal is colder than the room. Much colder." I realized he was right when I placed my hand on it. An icy chill rushed up my fingertips, sinking deep into my palm. Colder than a freezer. Colder than the air. It didn't make sense. Connor didn't seem scared, but he wasn't as casual as before. "Locks like these weren't meant to keep people out," he said. "They were meant to keep something in." His words lingered long after he started working. Sparks flew as he used a rotary cutter to slice through the first lock. The metal shrieked under the blade, the sound echoing through the basement like an animal cry. I flinched at the noise, but Connor kept working steadily. 20 minutes later, the first lock dropped to the floor. Then the lights flickered. Connor paused. "You get a lot of power issues here." "No," I said. "Not really." He shrugged and moved to the second lock. Halfway through cutting it, something slammed into the metal door from the inside. A deep, thunderous strike that shook dust from the ceiling and rattled the stairwell. Connor froze. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. I stared at the door, my heart pounding in my chest. "You tell me." He stood up, backing away, his face pale. "Is someone in there?" "No," I said, though the word felt like a lie. "There can't be. The door was locked. It's been locked for decades." Connor wiped sweat from his forehead, gripping the cutter tightly. Something hit it, something big. The air grew heavier. The pressure in the room thickened until my ears popped. Then came the sound, a dragging scrape, slow and grinding, like fingernails or claws trailing along the other side of the iron. Connor grabbed his toolbox. "Nope, no, I'm not staying down here with that." "Wait," I said, grabbing his arm. "I need this door open." "Then you're cutting the rest yourself." He turned and walked briskly toward the stairs. But before he reached the top, he stopped and looked back at me. Not with anger, not with fear exactly, but with something close to pity. Whatever is behind that door, it was never supposed to get out. Then he left. The basement felt like it inhaled his absence, swallowing the space he once occupied. The silence returned with a strange intensity. I stared at the half-cut second lock, the unfinished work, the door that seemed to pulse faintly with each breath I took. I picked up the cutter with trembling hands. It felt heavier than it should. The moment I touched the metal, the tapping began again. Soft at first, faint, almost pleading. Tap, tap, tap. My hands shook harder. I set the cutter down and ran upstairs, slamming the basement door behind me. I leaned against it, chest heaving, heart pounding so loudly I could feel it in my throat. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to open that door. Not yet, not alone. I thought about my mother, how she must have known, how she must have lived with these sounds, these rules, these shadows, and how she chose to leave the house to me despite all of it. There was something here she wanted me to know, something she couldn't say. I took a shaky breath and dialed the one person who might be able to help. Aunt Vivian, my mother's older sister, a woman I'd met only 3 times in my entire life. She lived far away, rarely visited family, and never seemed interested in reconnecting. But when she answered the phone and heard my voice, her tone changed instantly. "You're in the house, aren't you?" she asked. My grip tightened on the phone. "How did you know?" "Because Elaine told me she would never set foot in that place again, and she made me promise to stay away too." "What happened there? Why didn't she tell me anything?" A long, painful silence passed between us. "When we were children," Aunt Vivian said eventually, "your mother was terrified every night. We shared a room upstairs. I would fall asleep, but she always stayed awake, listening. She said the house whispered to her, said someone was in the walls. I didn't believe her, not until I heard it too." A cold shiver crawled up my spine. "What did you hear?" "Knocking," she said, her voice trembling. "From the basement, at the same time, every night. And once we heard a boy crying." My throat tightened. "A boy?" "Yes. Your mother said someone lived down there. Someone her parents told her never to mention." "Micah Aldridge," I whispered. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "How do you know that name?" "I found his journal." Silence again. Then, "Ethan," she said softly, You need to leave that house. Right now. I can't. I need answers. You're not going to find answers down there, she said. Only trauma. I have to open the door. No, she snapped. Your mother wrote those rules for a reason. What reason? Her voice broke, because she saw what came out the night the locks failed. I felt my blood run cold. What do you mean? But she wouldn't explain, wouldn't elaborate. She just kept saying my name over and over as if repetition alone could pull me out of the house. I'm sorry, I said finally. I have to finish what she started. I hung up. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I patched drywall, replaced rotten planks on the porch, cleaned the old kitchen cabinets. Each task helped keep my mind from spiraling, but none of them made the oppressive tension lighten. By sunset, the house felt heavier, like something pressing against the foundation from underneath. The walls creaked with a rhythm that didn't match the wind, and the tapping came again. This time, louder, closer, tap, tap, tap. I ran to the basement door, bracing myself against the cold draft seeping through the cracks. The taps ceased instantly, replaced by a single deep thump. Then a whisper seeped through the wood. Ethan. I staggered backward. Hours later, when the sky outside had turned deep black and frost formed along the windows, I heard footsteps on the front porch. Cautious, deliberate, heavy. I grabbed a hammer from the kitchen drawer and moved toward the door. The footsteps approached slowly, then stopped just on the other side. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. Then a firm knock sounded against the wood. Once, twice, 3 times. My breath caught in my chest. That wasn't the basement. Rule 5. If you hear knocking, do not answer it. I stood perfectly still. Then the knocking came again, but harder. 3 sharp blows that rattled the picture frames on the wall. I pressed my back against the opposite wall, the hammer shaking in my grip. A shadow shifted under the door frame, visible through the thin seam at the bottom. Ethan, a voice hissed, let me in. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The doorknob turned slowly, inch by inch, squealing softly in the dead silence. Something on the other side pushed, testing the lock. I tightened my grip on the hammer, but I didn't approach the door. I didn't even whisper. Let me in. The voice was wrong, too soft, too stretched, like someone mimicking human speech for the first time. The knob twisted violently. Then something slammed into the door with a force so great it cracked the frame. I stumbled backward, heart pounding violently. The thing outside hit the door again and again. Then it stopped. Silence. Just as I began to breathe again, a voice drifted behind me from the hallway. Ethan, it whispered gently. I spun around, hammer raised. No one was there. But I knew it wasn't coming from behind the front door. The voice had come from the basement, from behind the iron door. For a long moment I stood frozen between the 2 voices, 2 sources, 2 threats, one outside, one below. When the front door finally fell silent for good, my fear turned into something else, resolve. I was done being hunted by sounds and shadows and secrets. I went downstairs, grabbed the cutter Connor left behind, and positioned myself in front of the iron door. My hands were shaking, my breath trembled. The air was so cold now it felt like winter had spilled into the basement. I touched the cutter to the second lock. Ethan. The voice echoed again, this time softer, sadder, pleading. For a moment my eyes burned with tears I didn't expect, because the voice didn't sound threatening now. It sounded like someone who had been alone for far too long. I turned the cutter on. Sparks flew. The metal screamed. I cut through the second lock, then the third. When the final lock fell to the floor, the basement lights flickered violently, then burst, plunging the room into darkness. I reached out, fingers trembling, and gripped the handle of the iron door. Cold metal met my palm. The freezing temperature bit into my skin. I braced myself, and I pulled the door open. What I saw inside changed everything I thought I knew. The iron door groaned as it swung open, the hinges screaming like something waking after decades of forced silence. The air pouring out of the room was colder than anything I had ever felt, an unnatural cold that sank straight into my bones. My breath fogged instantly, even though the rest of the basement was still above freezing. For a moment, all I could do was stand there, gripping the door frame, fighting the instinct to slam it shut and run upstairs. But I didn't run. I stepped inside. The room was small, no larger than a walk-in closet. Concrete walls, bare floor, no windows. The overhead light flickered once and died, leaving only the glow from the hallway behind me. The dim light revealed just enough. Rust rings where chains had once hung. Shallow scratches covering the walls in frantic, desperate patterns. Dark stains, old, faded, but unmistakable, spreading in uneven patches across the floor. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I'd known something awful had happened here, but seeing the physical evidence brought a crushing heaviness I hadn't expected. This wasn't horror for horror's sake. This was trauma solidified into architecture, years of pain embedded in concrete. My flashlight landed on the far corner where something soft and collapsed lay in the shadows. I stepped closer and felt the air grow even colder. It was a mattress, or what used to be one. Old fabric, springs poking through, mold creeping along the edges. It had been shoved into the corner like a discarded thought. But the shape of it, the indentation of a body, felt too recent, like someone had been there not long ago. I reached out without thinking, then pulled my hand away as the flashlight flickered violently. The light steadied after a moment, but a whisper drifted through the room. A child's voice, faint, trembling. "Don't leave me." I spun around, flashlight shaking in my hand. The room was empty, just concrete and dust, but the voice had been there. I had heard it, not imagined, not mistaken. I stepped backward, hand trembling as I grabbed the cold door frame. Another whisper followed me out. "Please." I backed into the basement hallway, heart pounding as the voice faded into the air, leaving only silence and the weight of everything I had just witnessed. I closed the door, not fully, but enough to put a barrier between me and whatever had spoken. I was shaking when I climbed back upstairs. The house felt different now, speaking a language I could finally understand. It wasn't trying to terrify me, it was trying to show me something. After pacing the living room for several minutes, I finally sat at the kitchen table and opened Micah Aldridge's journal again. The words on the last page blurred slightly as tears pricked at my eyes. Not just fear or shock, but something deeper. Compassion, anger, grief. No one deserved to live like he had. No one. But I needed something more than a journal and whispers in the walls. I needed clarity, guidance. Someone who understood the spiritual weight of a place like this. Someone who could help separate fear from reality. Someone like Aiden Crow. I didn't know him personally. I'd only heard the name mentioned in a podcast once. Someone who worked with families experiencing unusual activity in old homes. Someone who specialized in spirit transitions and trauma cleansing. Not an exorcist, not a psychic. More like someone who treated spirits the way therapists treated people, with patience, empathy, and understanding. I found his number online, expecting a dead end, but he answered on the second ring. "This is Aiden." His voice was calm, deep, like someone who had spent years working in the quiet between worlds. "I need help," I said, the words trembling out of me before I could stop them. "My name is Ethan Ward. I inherited a house from my mother. There's a room in the basement. Something is in there. Something that needs help. Or wants something. I don't know." He didn't laugh, didn't question my sanity, didn't pause in disbelief. Instead, he said, "Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the rules, the footsteps, the tapping in patterns, the journal, the whispers, the door that should never have been opened. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he spoke softly. "You uncovered a trauma that has been sealed for decades. Spirits caught in trauma don't behave like Hollywood versions of ghosts. They relive their suffering. Their pain seeps into the air, into the walls, into anyone who walks inside." "So, this is real?" I asked. "You think it's a spirit?" "I think it's a person," Aiden said. "A person who doesn't know they're gone." My breath hitched. "Micah." "Yes," he replied. "And if what you described is accurate, he isn't malicious, he's trapped, and he's hurting." I felt tears sting my eyes again. Not fear this time. Sympathy. For a boy who had been locked away, forgotten by time and dismissed by a town that didn't want to remember. "What do I do?" I whispered. "You don't go back into that room alone," Aiden said. "Not yet, and not without understanding what he needs." "When can you come?" There was a pause. I heard faint movement on the other end of the line, and then, "I'll be there tomorrow morning." I slept in the upstairs hallway again that night, though slept was too generous a word. I stayed awake with the lantern burning beside me, listening to the house breathe around me. The air shifted occasionally, but nothing knocked, nothing whispered, nothing scraped, almost as if Micah knew help was coming. When dawn finally broke, pale and thin, I went downstairs to make coffee. As the machine gurgled, I glanced at the basement door. It was closed. I was certain I had left it open an inch, and the air around it felt warmer. A thud upstairs made me jump. I spun around, heart in my throat, but it was only someone knocking on the front door, but not the kind of knock from the night before. A gentle one. 3 soft taps. I peered through the peephole. A man stood on the porch, tall, long, dark hair, streaked with silver, wearing a worn jacket and jeans. His presence radiated calm, like someone who belonged in quiet places. Aiden Crow. He offered a small nod when I opened the door. "Ethan, may I come in?" I stepped aside. "Thank you for coming so fast." He walked inside slowly, his footsteps soft on the wooden floor. His eyes scanned the entryway like he was reading the air the way other people read books. "There's a heaviness," he murmured, "but not malevolence, just pain." He stepped into the living room, closed his eyes, and inhaled deeply through his nose. "He's aware of you," Aiden said. "He's been watching you." A chill ran through me. "Is he here now?" "Everywhere," he said gently, "and nowhere. Spirits in trauma don't anchor to a single location. They move like memories attached to emotion rather than space." He turned to me. "Take me to the basement." We descended the staircase together. Unlike the day before, the air wasn't frigid. It wasn't warm either, neutral, almost waiting. Aiden stopped at the iron door and placed his palm against it. He inhaled sharply, as though the cold bit into his skin. "This is where he suffered most," he whispered. "I know," I said softly. "You opened it." "Yes." And something spoke. Yes. Aiden nodded, as though confirming a suspicion. Ethan, what happened to this boy wasn't supernatural. It was human cruelty. His spirit isn't dangerous, it's fractured. He reached into the bag he carried and pulled out a small bundle of dried herbs tied with twine. White sage, he explained. Not to banish, but to comfort, to purify the space enough that he can hear us clearly. He lit the end of the sage. Smoke curled upward, soft and fragrant. The air shifted almost instantly, growing lighter around the edges of the room. The iron door exhaled a cold draft, like a held breath finally released. Aiden stepped inside the room first. I followed. The cold returned, but it didn't bite as sharply as before. It felt more like sorrow than malice, more like someone crying than someone attacking. Aiden lifted the sage, moving it slowly in circles as he spoke. Micah Aldridge, he murmured, we're here with you. We see you. You don't have to hide anymore. The smoke drifted in swirling patterns, gathering briefly in the corner where the mattress lay before dispersing. A faint sound echoed through the walls, a small, choked sob. My chest tightened. Micah, I whispered, we're here to help you. The sobbing deepened for a moment like a wave of emotion cresting, then faded. The overhead light flickered, the air thickened. Then I heard it. A child's whisper, clearer than before. It hurts. Aiden bowed his head. I know, you were mistreated, abandoned. That pain held you here. I swallowed hard. They hurt you, didn't they? Silence at first, and then, yes. The word drifted through the air like a breath. Aiden stepped closer to the corner. Micah, you didn't deserve what happened. You were just a boy. A long pause. Then, I'm sorry. My heart twisted. You don't have to be sorry, I said. None of this was your fault. A faint tremor shook the floor beneath us. The cold deepened, not aggressive, grieving. Aiden motioned for me to kneel. Talk to him, he whispered. He needs to hear your voice. I knelt beside the mattress, placing my hand lightly on its ruined surface. The fabric was freezing, painfully so. But I didn't pull away. Micah, I said softly, I know you were scared. I know you were alone, but you're not alone anymore. Not now. The air shivered. They locked me in. They said I was bad. His voice cracked. A child's voice shouldn't crack like that. Aiden spoke gently. You were not bad. They were wrong. They didn't understand you. I felt tears burning behind my eyes. You didn't deserve this, I whispered. You deserve peace. The room trembled not violently, but like a sobbing body struggling to breathe. I'm sorry I hurt them, I gasped. You didn't mean to, did you? No. A wave of sorrow washed over the room, so powerful it knocked the breath out of me. Aiden placed a steady hand on my shoulder. He was a child in terror, he said softly, and trauma makes the dead believe they're forever guilty. I wiped my eyes. Micah, you are forgiven. Whatever happened, whatever you think you did, you are forgiven now. Silence. Then, slowly, the cold lifted, curling away from my skin like mist. The sage smoke drifted upward, no longer clinging to the corners. The oppressive weight in the room dissolved into something faint, almost feather-light. For the first time, the space no longer felt haunted. It felt empty, peaceful. Aiden extinguished the sage and exhaled. He's gone, he said softly. He's finally moved on. I stared at the concrete floor, the walls, the old mattress. It didn't look different. Nothing had physically changed, but everything felt different. The grief was gone. The fear was gone. The pressure was gone. For the first time since I arrived, I felt the house breathe without pain. Thank you, I whispered, not to Aiden, not to the house, but to Micah. Thank you for letting go. Aiden touched my shoulder gently. Spirits like his linger because they're trapped in cycles of fear and guilt. You didn't free him. He freed himself. You just gave him permission. I nodded slowly. What now? Now, Aiden said, you reclaim the space, but do it with kindness. Honor what happened, but don't carry it with you. He stepped out of the room. I followed, closing the iron door behind me for the last time, not out of fear, but out of respect. When we reached the kitchen, the house felt entirely different, lighter, warmer, a place someone could call home instead of a place someone once suffered. Aiden packed his bag and walked to the front door. Take care of the house, he said, and take care of yourself. I will. And Ethan, your mother didn't leave you this house to burden you. She left it because she trusted you to end its suffering. His words hit me like a soft blow to the chest. After he left, I stood in the entryway, staring at the rules taped to the door. Never opened the iron door. I reached up, gently removed the paper, folded it with care, and placed it in a drawer. Not because the rule was broken, because it was no longer needed. That night, I slept in the upstairs bedroom with the window cracked open, listening to the calm night air. No whispers, no taps, no footsteps, just peace. The first true peace this house had felt in decades. For the first time since stepping foot inside my mother's forgotten inheritance, the house felt whole, not healed. Some wounds didn't close cleanly, but whole. As if the fractured pieces of its memory had finally settled, instead of scraping against each other in endless cycles of pain. I woke the next morning with sunlight filtering gently through the curtains, warming my face instead of chilling it. For a moment, I didn't move, afraid that if I opened my eyes, the silence would crack and spill out the old horrors again. But when I finally sat up and listened, the house breathed softly around me, wood expanding in the morning warmth, pipes settling, the rhythm of a place finally allowed to rest. I took a slow breath and whispered into the air, "Thank you." I didn't know to whom. Micah, the house, myself, maybe all three. There were still renovations to finish, responsibilities to handle, paperwork to sift through, but none of that felt urgent anymore. I walked downstairs barefoot, savoring the feeling of stepping onto floors that no longer groaned under unseen pressure. The kitchen smelled faintly of sage, a lingering trace of Aiden's work. The air was fresh, not stagnant the way it had been when I first arrived. I made coffee, and for once the house didn't seem to hold its breath as I moved. It simply existed. Later that morning, I texted my mom. "House is quiet now, peaceful. I think everything's going to be okay." She responded 10 minutes later, "Ethan, call me when you can. And thank you for being braver than any of us ever were." I sat on the porch steps with the coffee steaming between my palms and called her. She picked up almost instantly. "Ethan," she said, her voice softer than it had been in years. "I've hardly slept since you told me about the door. I keep thinking, maybe if I'd stayed, if I'd done something back then." I cut her off gently. "Mom, you were a child. You survived what you could." She inhaled sharply. "I knew something terrible lived under that house. Not a monster, a memory, and I couldn't face it." "You didn't have to," I said. "I faced it for both of us." There was a long moment where neither of us spoke. "You sound different," she murmured. "Lighter." "I feel lighter." I hesitated. "Mom, why did you never tell me about the Aldridges?" Her breath trembled across the line. because I didn't understand it as a child. And when I became an adult, the truth felt too heavy to revisit. Sometimes silence feels safer than memory. I get that, I said. But the house needed someone to break the silence. She sniffed softly. I'm proud of you. The words lingered even after we hung up, curling warm in my chest. For most of my life, Mom's strength had been subtle. Steady work, long hours, careful planning, quiet sacrifices. But this admission, this emotional opening, felt like the strongest thing she'd ever given me. By afternoon, I was ready to tackle the last part of the renovation, the basement, not the iron door room. That was done, sealed, honored, but the wider basement still needed care, replacing old insulation, repainting the walls, scraping rust off the exposed pipes, adding proper lighting, practical grounding work that brought the house back into the world of the living. I opened the basement door slowly. Warm air greeted me. That alone shocked me more than any cold spot or whisper ever had. The last time I stood here, the chill crawling up my spine felt like it had been exhaled from decades of grief. Now the stairway smelled faintly of dust and old concrete, but not sadness. I descended step by step, feeling the subtle give of the old wood beneath my weight. As I reached the bottom, the room felt normal, like any other basement in America. No oppressive pressure, no unnatural stillness, just dust, small cobwebs, and the kind of dim light that makes the world feel a little slower. I replaced the light bulbs first, bright LEDs that bathed the basement in crisp white light. The corners didn't feel darker now. The shadows didn't stretch. They stayed where they belonged. The iron door room remained closed. The frame around it was still cracked from years of neglect, and faint dust lingered on the handle, but the cold wasn't radiating from it anymore. If anything, it felt like the warmth of the house finally reached that corner of the basement after being unable to reach it for decades. I swept the dust, patched cracks in the foundation, resealed the edges. No voice followed, no tapping echoed. The silence was honest now, comfortable even. Halfway through installing new insulation, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Mara. My heart tightened. We hadn't spoken since she'd left the house in fear, and I wasn't sure how this conversation would go. I stepped upstairs, wiped my hands on an old towel, and answered. "Hey," I said softly. There was a pause. "Ethan, I'm sorry." Her voice cracked around the edges, more vulnerable than I'd ever heard it. "I shouldn't have left like that. I let my fear get the best of me." "It's okay," I said, and I meant it. "You didn't owe that house your safety, but I owed you support. I panicked, and I'm not proud of that." "You listened to yourself," I replied. "That's not weakness." She exhaled shakily. "I've been thinking about you non-stop. I want to see you, if you'll let me." Warmth spread across my chest. "I'd like that." "Is the house still—" She trailed off, as if searching for the right word. "Haunted?" I finished for her. She laughed softly. "Yeah, haunted." "No," I said, "not anymore." I heard her breath catch. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." "Okay," she said. "Then I want to come this weekend. I want to see you. And the house. But mostly you." I smiled for the first time in days. "I'll be here." After we hung up, I lingered in the living room and looked around. The transformation stunned me. Not just the repairs, but the atmosphere. Where once there had been pressure, now was ease. Where tension had loomed, light now filtered gently through the windows. After finishing the basement work that afternoon, I took a walk around the property. The backyard stretched out behind the house, wild and overgrown but not menacing. The trees swayed gently, not violently. Even the wind chime gave a soft, melodic sound, instead of that harsh, metallic clatter I'd heard before. Near the fence line, something caught my eye, a small mound of earth slightly raised. Not large, maybe 3 feet long, overgrown with weeds. I hadn't noticed it earlier, but now it seemed out of place. I knelt and brushed aside some of the tall grass. A piece of splintered wood jutted from the dirt, gray and weather-worn. I tugged it gently, and a larger board broke free. A name was carved faintly into the wood. M.A. 1960-1967. My breath stalled. A grave. Micah's grave. Not marked properly, not tended. Hidden behind the house like an afterthought. A sorrow too heavy for anyone to face properly. I sank onto my knees. Tears pricked behind my eyes again, but not from fear, from grief, from empathy so deep it felt like a pulse being pressed against a bruise. "I'm sorry," I whispered into the cold air. "You didn't deserve any of this." The wind rustled gently through the grass, almost like a sigh. I stayed there for several minutes before heading inside. When I closed the back door, the house felt lighter still, like acknowledging Micah's resting place had filled a missing piece. I worked late into the evening, repainting the stairwell, installing new outlets, sanding rough patches along the hallway trim. The house wasn't just quiet now, it was grateful. I could feel it in the way the boards didn't groan as much, the way the windows didn't rattle at the slightest breeze. By the time I showered and crawled into bed, the weight that had clung to my chest since my first night here was finally gone. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birdsong drifting through the cracked window. The air smelled fresh, earthy, clean, alive. I lay there for a long moment, soaking it in. Then something unexpected happened, a soft knock. Not at the front door, not in the walls, but on my bedroom door. I sat up slowly, every muscle tensing, until I realized it wasn't a hollow knock or a desperate pounding. It sounded like someone knocking politely before entering, 3 gentle taps. I swung my legs out of bed and walked toward the sound. "Hello?" I whispered. "Is someone there?" The hallway remained silent, but something warm brushed my shoulder as I stepped through the doorway, a gentle pressure like someone passing by with gratitude rather than warning. Then it was gone. No whisper, no voice, just peace. A sudden clarity settled over me. It wasn't a haunting, it was a goodbye. I smiled, placing my hand on the doorframe. "Goodbye, Micah," I whispered, "and rest easy." I finished the last of the renovations that week. Fresh paint, new flooring in the guest room, updated appliances in the kitchen, a repaired porch, a soft glow where dread once lived. When Mara arrived that weekend and stepped inside, she froze in the doorway. "It feels warm," she said, almost in disbelief. "Different, like something heavy was lifted." "It was," I said. "A lot was." She turned to me, eyes shining. "I'm proud of you." Her presence filled the house with a kind of comfort I hadn't realized I craved. We spent the next few days together, cooking in the new kitchen, walking through the restored rooms, sitting on the porch swing in the evenings, watching the sun dip behind the trees. She even braved the basement, her hand gripping mine as we descended the steps. "It feels normal," she said, relaxing. "It is normal," I replied. Finally. When the house went on the market a few weeks later, I didn't hide its past. I disclosed everything. Not the supernatural details, not because I wanted to hide them, but because they didn't belong in a legal document. What mattered was the truth. A child had suffered here. A tragedy had been buried here. A family had vanished here. But healing had happened here too. Real healing. To my surprise, a young couple fell in love with the place. They walked through each room, eyes wide, imagining a future instead of fearing the past. Their excitement reminded me of how hope sounds, light, buoyant, unafraid. When they made an offer, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. The house was ready for a new chapter, and so was I. On the day of the sale, after signing the paperwork, I returned one last time to the empty house. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Dust floated gently in the air. The rooms echoed softly as I walked through them. I paused at the basement door, placing my hand on the frame. "Thank you," I whispered, "for trusting me." I walked out the front door and locked it behind me. But before I stepped off the porch, a soft breeze rustled the wind chime, delicately like fingers brushing across silver. Not a warning, not a cry, a final farewell. I smiled. Then I stepped off the porch, down the walkway, and into the rest of my life, carrying with me not the weight of the house's past, but the peace of its release. The house I inherited from my mother came with rules no one should ever follow, but in breaking them, I freed the one who needed freedom most, and in doing so, I freed myself. For months after selling the house, life returned to something that resembled normal. Quiet morning, steady work, weekends with Mara, and long drives without the weight of old secrets pressing against the back of my mind. I slept well, I laughed more, and sometimes, on the edge of dreaming, I even forgot the way the basement felt that first night. But trauma, even inherited trauma, does something strange to you. It lingers, not as fear, but as awareness. Every now and then, I would wake in the early hours of the morning, long before sunrise, to a silence that felt impossibly familiar. A silence that hummed with memory, and for a moment, I'd listen for tapping that never came. Then one morning, months after I walked out of that house for the last time, I received a letter. No return address, just my name, written in a shaky hand. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Thank you for seeing me. M.A." I stared at the page for what felt like hours because I recognized something. The handwriting, small, unsteady, the same handwriting from the journal I found under the floorboard. I felt the air shift around me, not cold, not frightening, just present. And in that moment, I didn't feel alone, not haunted, not watched, just accompanied by memory, by gratitude, by a boy who had finally found rest. I folded the note carefully and placed it inside a drawer I rarely opened. Not because I wanted to forget it, but because some things are too heavy to leave in the light every day. Life moved on, but I carried Micah's story with me. The way you carry a lesson you didn't ask to learn, but are better for knowing. Some nights, when Mara falls asleep beside me and the world is quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat, I think about the house, about its walls, its grief, its eventual peace, and I realize something I never understood before. Houses don't remember the people who live in them. They remember the pain they hold, and they remember the ones brave enough to set that pain free. I wasn't chosen by the house. I wasn't cursed. I wasn't destined to open that door. I was simply the first person willing to look at the darkness inside it and say, "You've suffered enough." And maybe that's why the house let me go. Maybe that's why it stayed quiet for the family who moved in after. Maybe healing doesn't erase the past. It just allows it to stop screaming. As for me, I no longer fear old houses, or creaking floors, or the moments of silence between heartbeats. Because I learned something important in that basement. The things that scare us most are often the ones that were scared long before we ever met them. And sometimes the only thing they ever needed was for someone to finally listen.